The air was crisp as I parked my car and walked towards the pumpkin patch, my breath visible in the twilight chill. The sun had dipped below the horizon, casting an eerie glow over the field. Shadows stretched long over the mounds of pumpkins, and the quiet was thick, heavy. I had never been to the Pumpkin Hollow patch at night. I'd always heard it was a little spooky after dark. But this year they'd advertised a special Night of Frights tour, and being the horror buff I am, I couldn't resist. The entrance was marked by an old wooden arch, decorated with dried corn stalks that rustled faintly as the wind picked up. I looked around and noticed I was alone. Not even a single pumpkin patch worker was in sight, despite the fact that they'd sold tickets for a nighttime, haunted experience. I checked my watch, 7:00 p.m., right on time. I hadn't even seen anyone else on the road here, but I figured maybe that was part of the gimmick. As I stepped through the entrance, the air grew colder and a chill crept up my spine. The silence was absolute, so complete that even my own footsteps sounded out of place. Rows upon rows of pumpkins stretched before me, hundreds of them, most of them bloated, misshapen, their stems twisted and gnarled. Some even looked like they had faces, ugly ones, almost human expressions carved by nature rather than by a knife. A shiver ran through me as I pushed forward. About 50 yards in, I saw a small tent. The orange and black canvas flapped lightly in the breeze, and a hand-painted sign on a wooden board in front read, "A welcome to the Hollow. This is your last chance to turn back." I laughed it off, but as I looked around, I noticed something odd. The pumpkins here were larger, darker than the ones closer to the entrance. Some looked almost bruised, with strange dark markings, as though something had scratched or clawed at them. I took a deep breath, shook my head, and kept walking. As I passed the tent, a movement in my peripheral vision made me freeze. I turned, expecting to see a worker or another visitor, but there was nothing. Just rows of pumpkins, shadows deeper now, thick like ink in the darkness. I tried to shake it off, but I couldn't ignore the feeling of being watched, like something was lurking just out of sight. Then I heard it. A faint sound, almost like a whisper, carried on the wind. It was soft, unintelligible, but unmistakably human. "Hello!" I called, my voice sounding thin in the vast emptiness. Silence. I shook my head, laughing nervously to myself. "Get a grip," I muttered. But even as I tried to reason it away, the whispering grew louder, more persistent. It seemed to come from all directions, filling the air around me, until I could make out words, faint but clear. Help me, please." My heart lurched. It was the voice of a child, no more than 7 or 8. I looked around, scanning the rows of pumpkins, but saw no one. It was absurd. I knew it was probably some speaker hidden nearby, part of the haunted experience. I kept moving, trying to shake off the feeling of unease that settled deeper with each step. The path twisted and turned, leading me into the center of the patch. The pumpkins here were monstrous, some the size of small boulders. They looked as though they'd been left to rot, their skins covered in strange, moldy patches. I caught a whiff of something foul, like decaying vegetation, and gagged. Something dripped from one of the pumpkins, a dark, viscous substance that didn't look anything like sap. I stepped back, repulsed. And that's when I saw it. A small figure standing in the shadows between 2 of the massive pumpkins. It was a child, a girl dressed in old-fashioned clothes, her hair hanging in tangled strands around her face. Her skin was pale, almost translucent, and her eyes, there was something wrong with her eyes. They were too dark, almost black, and they stared at me unblinking, empty. "Are you lost?" I asked, my voice shaking. She didn't respond. Instead, she tilted her head, a strange, almost mechanical movement, and pointed to something behind me. I turned, my heart pounding, but there was nothing there. When I looked back, The girl was gone. I took a shaky breath, my mind racing. It had to be a part of the haunted tour. Just an actor, I told myself, trying to ignore the cold sweat that slicked my skin. But as I moved forward, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was terribly wrong. There was no laughter, no jump scares, no sounds of other people. Just me, the pumpkins, and the silence. The path led me deeper still, the pumpkins more grotesque, some looking almost like twisted faces, gaping mouths, hollow eyes. The smell of rot was stronger now, overwhelming. I was about to turn back, but that same voice echoed again, closer this time. "Help me, please, don't leave me." The voice sounded desperate, terrified. Against my better judgment, I moved forward, following the sound. It led me to the very back of the pumpkin patch, where the field gave way to a small grove of trees. Shadows clung to the branches, and the trees themselves looked dead, their branches twisted like skeletal fingers. I hesitated, but then I saw her again. The girl was standing just inside the grove, her dark eyes watching me. She turned and began to walk into the trees, her bare feet silent on the dead leaves. "Wait," I called, my voice trembling. She disappeared into the shadows, and I followed. The grove was colder, the air sharp and filled with the smell of damp earth. The trees were packed closely together, their branches reaching down like claws. I pushed forward, branches scratching at my arms and face, until I emerged into a small clearing. There, in the center, was a single pumpkin. It was massive, easily 5 feet across, and unlike any other pumpkin I'd seen. Its skin was deep red, almost the color of blood, and strange symbols were carved all over its surface. They looked like runes, jagged and cruel, glowing faintly in the dark. The girl was standing beside it, her hand resting on the pumpkin as she stared at me. Her face was expressionless, her eyes dark pits. What is this?" I whispered, feeling a primal fear settle in my bones. She didn't answer. Instead, she pointed at the pumpkin, her hand trembling slightly. I moved closer, drawn by some unseen force, and as I neared, I saw that the pumpkin wasn't empty. Inside, something was moving, pressing against the thin skin, as though something was trapped inside, trying to claw its way out. The girl looked at me, her voice barely a whisper. "It's hungry." My blood ran cold as the pumpkin began to tremble, cracks forming along its surface. I stumbled back, watching in horror as a hand, pale bony with nails like claws, pushed through the skin of the pumpkin, tearing it open. The stench of decay filled the air as the thing emerged, a creature twisted and deformed, its face half rotted, its eyes dark and hollow.